When I first moved to Japan, the craziest thing happened. I was 19 years old and I had never left the country before, yet somehow I very quickly found myself on a trip to rural Japan. The plan was great in theory, but a lot ended up going awry. There was a massive snowstorm, I knew no Japanese, and to top it off, my internet wasn't working to get directions to our hostel. All hope seemed lost until we randomly ran into an older Japanese man. When he noticed we were lost pulling our luggage through the snow, he immediately dropped everything to help us find our way. We couldn't speak a word to each other with the language barrier, but I could still see the kindness in his eyes as he attempted to extend a helping hand. And guess what? After 30 minutes of him walking us up this massive snow-covered hill, he had safely led us all the way to our hostel.
I think especially because that happened during my first week in Japan, that story really sticks with me. I have never experienced the friendliness, the kindness, the helpfulness that I've experienced in Japan. Of course, there's anomalies. I don't want to just generalize everybody into one big mush pot. But as a whole, it's more about like the feeling and energy that you get when you're here rather than this person was nice to me. There are so many things I love about living in Japan, but that is absolutely one of them. Another thing that I've really grown to love about living in Japan is the value of nature here. If you go up north, you can go to the Japanese Alps. For example, in Hokkaido, it's the coldest place in Japan. It is the best snowboarding, skiing, and they have this ice festival in February. That is one side of the spectrum. And then in the south side of Japan, it's definitely warmer. It's a more tropical climate. Like Yakushima is one of my favorite places in Japan. It's just this diverse ecosystem. It's always raining, but it's like lush and green. There's just so much in Japan that like even if I lived here forever, I wouldn't be able to uncover everything. But I find that in Japan, they see the value in the nature. I find that this is very evident, especially during cherry blossom season. It is such a fleeting period of time, and for the Japanese, that is very much symbolic. During cherry blossom season, you very quickly see the progression of life from when it's a little bud, it's starting to spurt, and then it blossoms, it's beautiful, everyone wants to enjoy it, and then in the matter of a week or two, it's all gone. I feel like a lot of people don't realize that cherry blossom season is so short and it's not this thing that lasts all springtime long. And in Japan in general, I feel like there is that emphasis to enjoy the beauty of life while it is here, but also a reminder that it is finite, it is short, it wisps away when you least expect it. But I feel like being here really allowed me to appreciate the nature and encourage me when I'm back home to find the beauty in the nature around me there as well.
I love that everyone is so equally excited about this like one tree that's blooming. It's January right now, so it's definitely not super normal that this is happening. So it's very sweet. Everyone is stopping by and taking pictures of it. I love it.
Another thing I love about Japan is emphasis on respect. This is seen in everything that they do. People are always showing respect to their elders, everybody around them, their environment. It's truly amazing, and I feel like it's so difficult to emphasize to someone. Like you can tell someone who's never been to Japan, oh my gosh, they're so respectful, but until you're here and you feel the energy of respect, like I feel like you can never truly conceptualize it. An example of respect that I found so interesting the first time I went to a movie theater, pretty much everything was quote unquote normal to me, and then it was just Japanese subtitles for them. We watched the movie, it was all fine and dandy, and then it ends, fade to black, starts rolling the credits. Usually I'll wait for a little bit, I'm just like winding down after watching the movie, and then eventually like the lights come up and everyone moseys out. That is not what happened in the slightest. When the credits started rolling, I noticed that the lights were staying off the whole time, and I was like, it's a little dark. I was trying to gather up my stuff and I was gonna start leaving, and I looked behind me and the entire theater of Japanese people was just sitting there. Yeah, I was a little confused, and I ended up asking my friend about it, like why is nobody going? And my friend told me that they were showing respect to the creators of this movie. So basically, by taking the time to sit there as the credits are rolling and acknowledging all the people who worked on this film, that was their sign of respect. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. And the craziest thing about it to me was that it was an English-speaking movie, so all the credits are in English and not everybody speaks English. But regardless, they were still sitting there to watch the movie. It was incredible. And I'm a performer as well, so I noticed the respect that they give me. The Japanese audience is unlike any audience that I've ever performed for, and it is truly just magical. Some other examples of respect is the quietness on the trains, the trash situation. I know for a lot of people coming to Japan, it is very frustrating to not have trash bins everywhere, but it is a big respect for the environment, be accountable for your own things, and bring your garbage home with you and not leaving it all over the place. Yet there's not a single lick of garbage anywhere. Obviously, every now and again you might see something, but I really don't, unless it's a glove. Which brings me to my next thing. Japan is definitely one of the safest countries in the world. I've never felt safer than I do when I'm in Japan. Speaking of the glove, a couple weeks ago I was walking through a train station with my friend and I realized I only had one glove in my hand. I'd taken one of them off to go through my pockets and get my train pass, and at some point I must have dropped it, and I was we have already been walking for about 5 or 10 minutes through this train station. This glove is long gone, but I kind of had this feeling I feel like maybe I can find the glove. And also, I feel like gloves are those things that I keep losing, and I felt the need to go back to find it. So we completely retraced our steps through the entire station. It had now been 15 minutes since I had probably originally dropped the glove. Still hadn't found it, and as we were approaching the ticket gates, I see something in the distance. And yeah, you guessed it, my glove was sitting there untouched. Usually when something is lost in Japan, people either leave it exactly where it was on the floor, or they'll move it off to the side just to make it visible, but so people won't step on it. I've seen this with wallets on the side of the road. I have seen other people's gloves hung up on a side of the pole or something. Maybe sometimes that gives me slight false sense of safety. But truly, there's never been an instance where I have felt unsafe in Japan. The next thing that I love about Japan that I wanted to talk about is being a minority. So, of course, that has its pros and cons. So let's get into that. I think it is very important to see life from a minority's standpoint. I grew up in a relatively diverse neighborhood, but in generally, I would say it was still predominantly white. There is just something very humbling about being one of the only people in your environment who doesn't understand you. And maybe this is something that is discomforting to some, and maybe they feel like this is a bad thing about living in Japan, but I think it enhances the way that you see the world. I think it gives you more empathy to others in future situations where you are not the minority. In general, I feel like there are more pros than cons. Some of the ways it can be nice is that they can obviously tell you that you're a foreigner. There are a lot of people who do want to give foreigners a good impression of Japan. They're excited about where you've come from, maybe they enjoy traveling as well and they want to know about you. But I've also been turned away from restaurants. It has happened a handful of times where I've tried to go into a restaurant and they were definitely open. It wasn't oh, the kitchen is closed kind of thing. And they just turned us away because we were not Japanese. There are some signs that say Japanese only restaurant. Again, this is something that can off-put a lot of people, but I do think it's very important to see things from their perspective as well. We don't know what that shop owner has been through, and being in a homogeneous culture, if they've never met other nationalities and their one experience with a foreigner is them coming into their restaurant being belligerent or not paying or, whatever the situation may be, that is going to ruin it for the rest of us. I do think it's important that when foreigners come to visit a homogeneous culture that we keep that in mind, that we're not just representing ourselves, but we're representing foreigners as a whole, because a lot of people don't have anything to compare it to, So yeah, that stuff can be a little bit frustrating at the time when it feels like you're being turned away and you didn't do anything, but I don't know, that's just kind of my take on it. Like I was saying, they have a very homogeneous culture, and that brings me to the next thing on my list, which is culture as a blanket. Another thing I love about living in Japan is the insanely rich culture. Naturally, they have elements about their culture that are very important to them, and it's been amazing as someone from the United States to come and experience. Because for me, I don't really feel like there's a whole lot of rich, quote-unquote, culture that I've experienced during my life. America is obviously a very young country in comparison, so it's just not the same in that regard. When my grandma immigrated to the United States from Ecuador, she kind of pushed a lot of her culture away. At that time, it was very much about wanting to fit in, and I understand. However, I now know nothing about my culture, which is very sad. With that being said, I very much do appreciate culture, the holidays, the family traditions, the foods. There's just so many amazing things to experience that is different from what I'm used to, and there is so much to gain as a foreigner living in Japan. And I think it is really helpful and important to try and embrace that while you're here. It's kind of one of those things that you get out of it what you put into it. So when you go out of your way to put yourself in those situations of, I'm going to go to a festival, I'm going to go out of my way to make Japanese friends and learn from the traditions that they get to do with their families, go to a traditional Japanese hotel. There's so many ways to immerse yourself in that way, and being put in those situations is just a breath of fresh air. And it's one of those things that just broadens your mind a little bit more. It gives you more empathy to other people's cultures and kind of pulls you back from any egocentric thinking. Upon going back to the States as well, it gives me an awareness to other people's cultures when I'm home, which I didn't really have that before. Like even my close friends who very evidently had a different culture than me, like I was just never really aware of those things. And maybe that's ignorance, but also like how would you don't know until you know when you're put in those situations. So I think there's a lot to gain from the culture.
Oh, the cats are here. The cats are here. I found the cats.
On to the next thing. Something I think the Japanese do very well is, although they are very tied to their traditions, they also do very good at that balance of like seeing the value of the past, but also looking towards the future. They're seeing the things that are happening in the West and integrating both of those things into their daily life, which I think is really cool. There's an emphasis on the maintenance of the culture and the past, but also taking those elements of like Western technology, for example, and enhancing it. I think something the Japanese do very well is going above and beyond, like creating this spectacular experience regardless of what it is. Maybe it's a show. For example, when I was working at Disneyland, those shows are incredible. There is so much that goes into it, and then they just replace it like after a couple years because it's like, oh, we need something new. It's like that thirst for greatness. I don't know, it's really cool. And I know this is something that I like joke about sometimes, but also like the toilets, like the heated toilet experience is elite. You cannot tell me different. It doesn't sound very exciting, but like anytime I'm in Japan and I'm like greeted with a nice warm toilet seat, it is just like they've gone out of their way to make the restroom experience like above and beyond, like an actual experience. It's just, anyway. Another thing I love about living in Japan is the food. Oh my gosh. There's so much I could say about Japanese food. I feel like just all my favorite foods are Japanese food. Like growing up, every single birthday I had, as long as I can remember, I would go to a Japanese restaurant and get sushi and all of it. I mean, at that time it was kind of like fake Japanese food. It was like California rolls, but still, some of my favorite dishes are okonomiyaki, soba. I like everything. Not everything. I don't know, there's not too much really left to say about the food. I just really enjoy the food, and living in Japan, obviously the food is here, so there's that. This next one kind of stems off of food, and something I really love about Japan is their approach on health and well-being. A memory that really sticks out to me for some reason. There was this one time that I was at Osaka Castle. This was around the first month or two of me living in Japan. There was this old man that was walking around, and he ended up coming up to me and my friends, and he was just trying to make like general small talk, but he told us like, oh, every day I walk up to Osaka Castle for my health. And I just thought that was so interesting. Over the span of me living here, I feel like a lot of people say, oh, I do this for my health. It's stuff like walking, stretching, going outside, and I feel like sometimes at home that's like not something that's emphasized. And let me tell you, Osaka Castle is on a pretty gnarly hill, and I'm assuming he like walks up that thing. A body that's in motion stays in motion, so I think that is really valuable, and I think it starts at an early age. Japan has this thing called radio exercise, which I find very interesting. I encountered it for the first time when I was at work, and the warm-up was basically us doing radio exercise. And I'm like, what is this? What is going on? They just turned on this track, and everyone in the room knew exactly what to do. It was like this instructional video with some like reaches and sweeps and
Radio exercise number 1. First, stand tall and stretch your whole body. 1, 2, and back down. Stretch your back. Next, arms and legs. 1,
Anyway, so I was told that pretty much everyone in Japan knows radio exercise, and starting from like wee itty bitty age, like people typically start the day with radio exercise. I mean, I'm happy to be corrected if I'm wrong, but this is what one of my Japanese friends said. I was told that even construction workers will do radio exercise before they start work, just like for general stretching, which makes sense. Like those things just, I'm like, that's really good. That is good that they're doing that, because most people don't do that. Of course, with the good things, there's always going to be some bad things. Pretty much everything on this list, I could give you the counter argument as well, like, but they kind of struggle here. But that's not really the point of this video. Like, in general, I'm a person that likes to like look towards the good and feel the good, and regardless of where you are, Japan, the States, wherever you are in the world, there's always going to be things you love about where you live and maybe don't love as much. But your perspective determines what you get to see more of and what kind of energy you want to welcome in your life. I love Japan. I love living in Japan. If anybody is ever contemplating like, maybe I should go to Japan, I would very much recommend it. I moved here when I was very young. Like I said, I was 19 years old, and having an experience like this absolutely changed my life. The growth that I was able to have from an experience like this is absolutely not something you can replicate if you don't do something like this. That's just my hot take. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. And I would love to hear your opinions too. If you live in Japan, tell me the things that you love. Let me know if you agree. I mean, I'm happy if you disagree, happy to hear those thoughts as well. So go ahead. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.